Hi there. Today I'm going to share something with you that up until now I've only ever shared on my paid webinars and masterclasses. And it's my model to explain how past trauma experiences create certain coping behaviours that later on in life the trauma is past, but the behaviours continue and therefore they become maladaptive. They don't serve us. Just some of the many possible symptoms are always being wired, unable to switch off and relax. Procrastination, especially perfectionism and second-guessing yourself. Memory problems, extreme sensitivities to all sorts of things. OCD, and many, many more. After sharing my model with you, I'll explain how some of these traits came into being, how they were triggered by trauma, and what you can do now to start creating shifts that move you away from those maladaptive behaviours. So here it is, my very high-tech model to explain how trauma creates behaviours that serve us at one time in our life, but later on work against us, are maladaptive. So of course it's a drinks coaster and an elastic band, but I like to keep things simple, and I think that's one of the best ways of explaining things to people. So when you were born, as long as you had good health, physical and mental health, your body was able to function completely autonomously. The blood flow, the heart rate, the oxygen supplies, all were working just as nature intended. Everything was in alignment, just as the elastic band shows that flow, that balance, that harmony. So you were wired, if you like, to respond to certain needs that you had. So if you were hungry, you would start to wriggle about a little bit, maybe start to complain, to cry. If you were uncomfortable, if your nappy or diaper was soggy or soiled, then you would let your parents or your carers know again by wriggling about or crying or even shouting. So in the normal course of events, when a child is well cared for, I'm giving examples as a baby, but of course this applies to slightly later when that baby becomes a toddler, a young child and an older child. So they have what they need to alert their parents, their carers, to their needs. So when a baby is comfortable, well fed, then everything is just in harmony as it needs to be. When there is a need not being met, then there will start to be a reaction within the body. The baby will have certain sensations that, as I said before, will alert the parent or carer that something needs to be done. So momentarily that harmony and balance and that flow is going to be a little disturbed, if you like, whilst the body is not so relaxed because the baby is tense, maybe crying, screwing up its face, tensing his or her muscles. So there is movement from this point of balance and calm to a place slightly outside of that. In the normal course of events, a parent or carer will attend to that baby quite soon. Usually if they are able to, they will go straight to the baby and feed him or her, change him or her, etc. There may be times when the parent is otherwise occupied, maybe tending to other siblings who need more immediate attention, and so there will be some distress as the baby begins to react and cries louder, becomes more distressed. But once their needs are tended to, that distress, those reactions will calm down, the baby will become soothed, and everything will return to this place of balance and harmony. In the case of a baby or a child where the needs are consistently not met, or not met in a timely way, or not met sufficiently, then we see this dysregulation. The body is very rarely in this place where everything is flowing, the oxygen, blood flow, heart rate, etc. So there is a movement outside of that normal state of being, and when this goes on for weeks, months, even years, then the default position will move to somewhere completely away from that original place of calm and natural flow. So the behaviours may be, for example, a child that screams a lot because they have to get louder and louder in order to get a response. But in some cases, a baby or a child may become extremely calm, unresponsive, unreactive, because they have realised, even from a very tender age, that there was no point in shouting, screaming, wriggling, because nobody came. So either way, there is a shift from this point to either hyperactivity or hypoactivity, reduced activity, extreme calm. Neither of which, of course, are how we are meant to be. So if those situations of neglect, abuse, loss of some sort continue and are not addressed, then that child will grow and develop in one of these extreme ways. They may be very agitated, hypervigilant, very active, very loud, talking a lot, or they could have gone the other way where they go into themselves, become very withdrawn. And both of those and many different varieties of responses that can happen in between those can become how that child is growing up, going through childhood, adolescence and into adulthood. But of course, in adulthood, in most cases, there are exceptions, that person is no longer faced with those adversities. They have choices, they are in control of their own life, but their body, mind and brain have just got used to operating at one of these positions and don't know any different. But whilst someone might feel that this is just who they are and how they are, operating on one of these levels that it is not where everything is flowing and in alignment, it is completely possible to create shifts that will move us back from one side or the other to this place where we feel at one with ourselves and with the universe around us. And in a few moments I'm going to tell you how you can begin to create those shifts. Some things you may be able to do on your own, some things you may need to reach out to a professional therapist for support. Before we do that, let's have a quick look at the sort of situations, traumas that may have caused the symptoms and traits that I mentioned at the beginning in the first place. So I first mentioned the traits of somebody always feeling wired, struggling to switch off and relax. And those sorts of behaviours come from a history of having to be hyper vigilant, having to look out for, listen out for signs of imminent danger, and needing to therefore protect yourself as a child, or protect other people in your environment, in your family, maybe younger siblings, or maybe even a parent, for example. And this hypervigilance just stays with us unless we find ways of working through it. And in a moment I'll talk to you about how you can start to do that. Another trait was procrastination, especially perfectionism and second-guessing yourself. But of course there are many, many ways of being a procrastinator. But that perfectionist trait and the inability to make a decision and stick to it, always second-guessing yourself, comes from a history of being told you're not good enough, or knowing that whatever you do, it's not going to be good enough, it's not going to enable you to escape some sort of punishment. So it comes to a point where you're unable to feel that something is good enough, is adequate. And again, those feelings that you are substandard, whatever you do, whatever you say is not acceptable, is not going to please somebody, because people-pleasing tendencies also arise from this, that can stay with you until adulthood unless it's been addressed. Memory problems. Many of my clients who experienced trauma early in life do have whole chunks of their childhood that they can't remember, and know that in adulthood they still have issues retaining certain information and remembering a lot of events. When we are faced with overwhelming traumatic experiences, we often dissociate in order to be able to cope. The reality of what is happening is too much for us to literally get our heads around, so we will detach, we will dissociate from that. And that creates gaps between ourselves and what is happening, and therefore affects the ability to easily retrieve those pieces of information later on in life. They are still there, and in other videos I talk about how these events are buried in our deep subconscious, so they are still there and have the potential to filter through and affect us, influence our behaviour, but we feel that we cannot remember those events because our brain has done this dissociation in order to protect us at the time. Extreme sensitivities is another one. Because of trauma, abuse, neglect, loss, we can become highly sensitized to certain sounds, certain smells, certain sights, because our brain associates certain things with the trauma, with the adversity, and we have just got this sensitivity and are easily triggered, and we may not even realize that we are having memories as we smell or see or touch something, but there is an association that again has been buried deep in our subconscious that is reactivated in certain situations. But we may not be able to explain that in adulthood. We are just aware that we are very sensitive to certain things. OCD is another trait that I mentioned, and OCD is all about control. And of course, if you were a child suffering trauma, suffering abuse, neglect, loss, then you are out of control. You are not able to control your environment. So our brain needs a certain amount of control in order for us to feel safe, for the flight, fight, freeze responses not to be activated. So we will search, our brain will drive us to find things that we can control. And it may just be certain patterns of behaviour, certain things that we can do in a certain order that soothe our mind in a way. It may be ordering things in a drawer in our space. It can take on many different forms, but it comes from that need, that drive to control, from times when we weren't able to control anything, we were completely the victim. So what can you do if you know that you have these traits or unwanted behaviours or other maladaptive behaviours that you believe are linked to childhood adversity, childhood trauma? So some of the things I'm going to suggest you may be able to do, especially if you have already had some sort of psychological support. But if you haven't yet, then you may need to work with somebody before you're able to put these other tools and tips into practice. So for someone who is unable to switch off and relax, practicing mindfulness, starting in a really small way, is going to be your first step. Sometimes people are able to explore mindfulness and to practice mindfulness alone, but again, you may need to work with somebody in order to just bring down the hyper arousal that is still raging in your body before you're able to unwind a little bit and to just get used to being in the moment. If you're going to do this, I would suggest literally starting with 1 minute at a time. It doesn't have to be long, but start with 1 minute, maybe do 1 minute a couple of times a day for a week, and then make that 2 minutes and just build it up until you maybe reach 5 or 10 minutes and make that part of your daily routine. Practicing mindfulness can also be really useful if you have memory problems, because it gets us used to feeling grounded and to feeling safe in the moment. So that could also help with memory issues. If you struggle with procrastination, perfectionism, second-guessing yourself, then you will need to start rebuilding your self-esteem. You were born with a completely healthy level of self-esteem, so you can rebuild that, but very gradually. Start with some small self-care practices. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just giving yourself permission to sit down and relax or do something just for you. Again, starting very small, aim for 5 minutes and build that up. And then as you go along, just add more and more self-care practices, and remember that you are worthy of being taken care of. You are the best person to do that. And as you rebuild that self-esteem from the inside, you will naturally grow that self-confidence, that belief in yourself, and won't find the need so much to put things off or to not do something in case it goes wrong. You will have the faith in yourself to explore, to see, and to know that if something doesn't go to plan, it's not the end of the world. If you experience extreme sensitivities, then you could try exercises that involve you reparenting yourself. You can work with your inner child, or you can just practice talking to yourself in a caring, loving way. So if there are certain places that you want or need to go to but have this adverse reaction, and something is making that extremely uncomfortable, then you can just talk to yourself as though you're a parent talking to a child and saying, for example, okay, well, we're just going to go and spend some time near this place. We don't have to go in, or we don't have to go too far, but let's just go and look and encourage yourself to take baby steps towards that place. And if you have any other sorts of sensitivities, take the same approach. Just if you want to get over it, and there's no compulsion to get over all the traits, we don't have to solve or to change everything about ourselves. There are some things we can just say, well, this is me, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, and that's okay. But if you have a reason for wanting to get over something, then do it in baby steps, and make sure that your self-talk is kind and encouraging. If you struggle with OCD tendencies that are negatively impacting on your quality of life, then some of the previous suggestions that I've made will also help that in some way. The kind self-talk that I've just mentioned, that will help you, rather than beating yourself up about the traits that you have, just addressing them in a more understanding way, and maybe just gently encouraging yourself to reduce a little bit what you're doing, and saying to yourself, you'll just see how it goes, and there's no pressure, but just maybe stopping doing one of the things in a sequence that you do, and see how that goes. Mindful practice will also help in just reinforcing that idea of being safe in the moment. But if you haven't already worked with a therapist and you have OCD tendencies, then I would advise you to reach out and get some professional help, at least to get you over the biggest hurdles, and then you can use self-help techniques and tools to help you reduce them over a longer period of time. So there you go, my elastic band model of childhood trauma, and I hope you found that useful and informative. Do comment below if you want to share any feedback on that with me. I'd love to hear from you. If you are an entrepreneur and you believe that you may have experienced, or you know that you have experienced childhood trauma, neglect, abuse or loss, then I have a free quiz and guide that you may be interested in. I'll pop the details below to tell you how you can get hold of your free copy. And as ever, don't forget to subscribe, to like the video if you've enjoyed it, and look out for my next video. I tend to put out one video a week, usually on a Sunday. So I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.